Hey everyone, I'm going to tell you why you probably shouldn't be buying a Benchmade Bugout, especially new, in 2025. This knife isn't to me as sensible as it was maybe 10 years ago or when it came out. In my country, when this knife came out, it was sub 100 euros and it's now about 160 euros at the very least for this basic version. If you want any kind of customization or special editions, you're going to need to spend at least 200 euros. So 160 for a base knife like this with Benchmade construction quality and materials, especially on the Bugout, isn't a sound investment in my humble opinion. Of course, if I diss this knife, I need to suggest an alternative, and that alternative is the cold steel Airlight. So in my country, this is 160 euros. This is easily less than 80 euros. Let's compare the qualities of these two blades. So starting with the blades, of course, S30V steel on the Benchmade and AUS 10 on the cold steel. The S30V blade is, in my opinion, slightly superior when it comes to steel qualities, but it's a bit more chippy, which makes it slightly less usable on harder or very dirty materials. So for actual concrete tasks, the S30V will maybe, depending on your sharpening time and sharpening abilities, will maybe make a little bit less sense than AUS 10, which will be much more chip resistant. It will tend to slightly roll rather than chip. Especially when one considers this extremely well done secondary bevel here on this blade. It's very slicey, very well done, and as cold steel tends to do, it's quite sharp out of the box. So when it comes to blades, lengths are basically the same. I mean, the Airlight has maybe half centimeter more, but it's not very significant, although you do get more cutting edge. Blade finishes are kind of equivalent to me. I don't care on a user blade. I really don't care between a stone wash like this and some satin finish like this. The satin finish does take fingerprints a bit more readily, as you can see. It's quite easy to mar with fingerprints, but given that both those steels are stainless, it won't be really an issue other than purely aesthetic. So yeah, I like both those blades. The deployment methods are of course the same, thumb stud, so equivalent in this regard. And one deciding factor to me will be the width, the thickness of the blade. The AUS 10 one on the cold steel right here is almost twice as thick as on the Benchmade. To me, that's an advantage. That's a quality I'm looking for. I like a slicey but still robust blade, especially when it comes to the point. As you can see, the point on the Benchmade is extremely thin, which combined with the S30V steel might not be the best choice. The cold steel here is still quite acute, but definitely not as thin and more robust. So we talked about quantity of material on the blades. Let's talk about weight. As you can see, about 54 grams for the Benchmade, and the cold steel will be 90 grams. So 84 grams versus 90 grams. Does that make a significant difference? Actually, in my opinion, it does not, for one very simple reason. First, this weight difference is basically the weight of a good quality alkaline battery like this, AA battery. To me, it's not that significant. I'm not going to notice that amount of weight difference in my pocket day to day. So I don't care about the weight difference. And one last mention about the weight is the balance of those knives. The Benchmade to me, feels unbalanced, and that's easily analyzed. Of course, all the steel is on the blade and there are no liners, as we all know, on the Bugout, and that makes it extremely blade heavy. That's not a good feeling in the hand. It's not really a question of robustness and general construction quality. The Benchmade is actually quite resilient because it's very flexible and it doesn't break easy, but it does make it unbalanced, even when closed. it tends, when closed, to tilt on this axis. It doesn't feel balanced in the hand, it feels side heavy, if you will, and that's not a really good feeling. The Airlight, on the other hand, is quite balanced opened and very well balanced closed as well, because there is of course this G10 material on the scales and this steel spring for the triad lock on the back, and that makes it a bit more balanced. And to me, both those blades, although with a significant weight difference between them, feel about the same in hand. And that comes down to balance. Balance is very important when it comes to feeling the weight. And both those blades, to me, feel the same in hand. So I'm going to give it to the Airlight when it comes to weight, actually. Now let's go to handles. The Airlight has G10 handles with very nice texturing and okay chamfering on the edges. The Bugout is plastic handles, and it's very well chamfered because it's of course injected. But these handles are, as I said, unbalanced and very flexible, which is not a very reassuring feeling in the hand when using the knife. You can actually feel it shift a little bit when cutting heavy cardboard, for instance, and I don't like that. I'm going to give it to the cold steel for handle ergonomics and grippiness. One thing about those handles is, as you will see, that they are, although seemingly different when it comes to design, extremely similar when it comes to ergonomics. As you can see, both the points on the handle that actually matter for ergonomics, which is this finger choil here, and the hook on the back of the handle, are basically the same. They join together on the design here. And that makes both those handles quite secure in the hand. And there's no problem there, although the Airlight is slightly longer, as you can see, and that makes it a bit more large hand or gloved hand friendly. And that to me is actually an important matter, as I live in not an extremely cold environment, but cold enough during a few months. So gloved hands tend to be a reality for me, and I like having some extra real estate on the handle. And that of course helps the Airlight accommodate the slightly larger blade here. So when it comes to locking mechanisms, we have of course the axis lock here on the Bugout and the triad lock on the Airlight. The triad lock is much more secure, of course, we all know that, especially when this axis lock only uses very thin and diminutive steel inserts here, and that's the only thing that supports the lock, and I'm not a fan of that. Although I don't use this knife for particularly aggressive cutting, and this one neither, I prefer to have the most secure lock possible in on my knives. One thing about ergonomics from the lock, the Benchmade Bugout could seem to be slightly more ergonomic when it comes to one-handed deployment and folding back, but it's actually not really, because this pivot isn't as fluid as it should be or could be from Benchmade. Of course, the triad lock isn't even less fidget friendly, but it does allow for one-handed closing. All you have to do is put your index right here, place it right here, depress the lock and give it a little shake to disengage the blade. And the blade, if it comes down too much, will come and rest on your index and won't cut you, and then you'll just have to close it back in the handles. So both the knives are actually perfectly usable one-handed, no problem there. Now let's go to the clips. The clip on the Benchmade is deep carry and blackened and non-reflective. On the cold steel, it's the other way around. It's reflective, very shiny and not very deep carry, and also very long. So it's extremely visible and not very elegant. However, for a user blade, this is actually, to me, an advantage. I like to have a little bit of real estate to grab, to pull the knife out of the pocket, and I like a long and firm pocket clip to keep and secure the knife in the pocket or on the belt or wherever, in a bag maybe. So I actually do like this pocket clip right here, although I definitely agree on the fact that it's less elegant and a bit less discreet. But how elegant do you need to be with this bright blue and satin finished blade? I'm not sure. So this, on the clips, I think it will come down to personal preference. Although to me, for a user blade, I would prefer this kind of clip on the cold steel. So yeah, that was my 2 cents on both those blades. I don't like the Benchmade simply because it's too expensive for the materials, for the construction quality, and for the use cases that a knife this light and this fragile will be used for. So I prefer something like this cold steel Airlight, which comes, by the way, with a Tanto blade too, and with a couple different handle colors. And I do prefer this thing because it's more, first of all, because it's twice as cheap, because it's a bit more usable in different scenarios, and I find it to be generally more reassuring and generally better feeling than this Benchmade Bugout for much less money. Of course, go for the Bugout if you want it for the collection, if you want it for its prestige, for the made in USA factor. But if you're looking for a user blade, a usable blade, something that a companion, something that will serve and serve in most situations and serve well, I would suggest simply going for an Airlight, and maybe even 2 Airlights for the same price as this Bugout, and keep it one for the collection and one for using. Thank you for watching. I hope I didn't trigger too many people with this opinion right here. Please give me your 2 cents in the comments. I'm looking forward to read them, and have a good one.